The Meta household smelled of cinnamon and newspaper ink. The small family kitchen was a comfort the way an old song is comfort. Familiar chords. A rhythm that steadied every morning. Arav Mehta learned to read balance sheets at his father's elbow and to make chai the way his mother stirred it. Slow, precise, and with intent. They ran Mehta Textiles, a modest factory tucked between a row of warehouses, and a river that had seen better days. For 3 generations, the Mehtas had woven more than cloth. They'd woven a reputation. Arav was 28, neither tall nor striking, but he had a face that stayed open. When he listened, in a habit of keeping his hands busy with small calculations, folding his life into tidy margins. His sister Mira, 2 years younger, moved like a bright note in a song, quick laughter, quicker temper when someone spoke carelessly of their father. Ramesh Mehta, their father, walked with a stoop he refused to call age. Sunita, their mother, kept the house and the accounts with the same steady exactness she had shown since the day she married. On quiet afternoons, Arav would walk the factory floor with a notebook, watching the looms breathe, counting the threads as if thread count were itself a kind of prayer. He dreamed in small, patient ways. Better machines, a clean ledger, a chance to send Mira to design school in London so she could stop being the only one in their neighborhood who didn't dream in the narrow language of must and mustn't. That autumn, a man came to town with a smile measured to disarm. Kabir Sinha arrived in an unbranded car, wearing a suit that could have been built to order for him. He moved through the market like a breeze through chimes, pleasant, inevitable. He called himself an investor. He said he liked Meta Textiles, the heritage, the honesty, and he sat at the Metas table and spoke of expansion the way people talk about weather. Casually, but with consequence. You have history, Kabir told Arav, palms flat on the table as though he could prop the family's future up with nothing but intent. Most of my deals are with new names. You're different. You have soul. You need capital distribution. A man like me can make that seamless. He smiled as if closing a window on doubt. Ramesh listened, a furtive pride tightening his jaw. The idea of new machines, the idea of Mira studying abroad, the idea that the family could breathe easier, it held them like a candle in a draft. He was not a man accustomed to asking, but he asked anyway. What do you want in return? He said. Kabir's smile thinned like a blade passed once through cloth. Only a partnership, he said. A stake. Equality on the board. Transparency. You keep your name, I bring the world. The words were kind. The offer smelled of fertilizer, of growth and future harvest. Arav should have been wary. Something in the way Kabir spoke of transparency felt like a man showing you a window while holding the hinge. But Arav was young in the hard ways that matter. He believed that good deeds paired with good business sense could hold. He also wanted to believe that his father deserved rest, that his sister deserved a shot at bigger things. People make decisions like these when the future aches in them. Mira watched the meetings with the frank curiosity of someone cataloging stars in a city sky. Once, when the 3 of them walked home under a wet street lamp, she bumped his elbow and said, "Promise me one thing. Don't let them take the colors out of this place." Arav laughed and squeezed her hand. Never. For a while, the world brightened like a page being turned. Kabir introduced them to an accountant in the city, a lawyer who could make paper, sing. Orders came in with the volume their old small shop had never known. There were factory upgrades, small at first, then larger, and a man from a brand in Europe who wanted samples. Money began to look like something that could be touched, then controlled, then safely set down in the ledger. Yet even as they celebrated, small things changed the texture of daily life. Kabir printed terms that read like kindness, but included clauses only a lawyer would read, clauses that could be argued, bent, and used. He began to attend every meeting. He offered advice that felt like guidance and slowly slid into the shape of decision-making. Ramesh told himself this was the cost of progress and clung to the comfort of the word partnership. The first crack came from a place no one expected, a late-night grievance filed by a small contractor who claimed Meta Textiles had failed to deliver and requested payment returned. The demand was petty, a ripple, but it came freighted with a reference to a tax irregularity, a phrase in the paperwork that made the hair along the back of Ramesh's neck rise. The accountant Kabir suggested handled the form with sleepy competence. Kabir patted Ramesh's shoulder like a son promising cure. "We'll handle this," he said. Weeks later, when they opened the post, there was a notice from the Revenue Department. An audit. Sudden, precise, insistent. Ramesh's face folded itself into the arithmetic of worry. "Clerical error," the lawyer pronounced. "We'll fix it." But paperwork multiplied. Meetings grew longer. The tone of the boardroom shifted. Kabir's voice, once bright and encouraging, took on an edge. "These things happen," he said. "Let us manage it." Arav began to stay at the factory later, walking aisles of fabric under the hum of machines and thinking in trades and tallies. He learned to spot the tiny ways language in contracts could be turned into levers. He began to notice details. A clause moved, a signature line amended, a different accountant's seal brought into the file. There were late deliveries that matched up suspiciously with the days Kabir was in town. There was a wire transfer from someone they hadn't met before. Each discovery alone was a mosquito, a nuisance. Together they began to sting in a pattern. Mira, who had the barometer of the house in her laughter, grew quieter. At night, she would sit by the kitchen window, knitting her way through design catalogs, and sometimes her eyes collected small storms. One evening she said to Arav, "Promise me again. Promise me you'll never let anyone make us small." He promised, like a child promising to guard a fort. He had not yet learned that promises can be raised as flags by people who do not understand their meaning. On a rainy afternoon, a truck rolled up to the gate with a man from the bank and a legal courier. They came for documents, for inventory checks, for signatures. They took politely. The sorts of things you never want strangers sorting through when your world feels precarious. Ramesh signed because the man from the bank smiled like a neighbor. Sunita cried in the supply room and told the seamstresses everything was fine until her voice stopped. Being honest even to herself. Across the river, in an office full of polished wood and the scent of success, Kabir made a call. He spoke with the kind of efficiency that kills small things softly. One check here, a withheld invoice there, a rumor that bloomed precisely where it should. On the surface, he was the friend who'd brought them growth. Under the surface, he was a hand that knew where to push to make walls fall. Arav did not see the calamity in a single flash. The world does not always fall like a stage collapsing. Often it frays, thread by thread, until one day there is nothing left to hold. He knew finally that the pattern of small betrayals had a geometry. When one of the auditors asked to look at the old payroll, when he insisted on seeing every ledger himself, the accountant gave him a look that was careful as a held breath. "Let us do this," Kabir suggested. "You should not have to bear this burden, Arav." But Arav had already learned to follow the lines where paper bent. And when he did, he found a signature he did not recognize on a loan agreement that carried their factory's name as collateral. He found forged initials, transfers to shell accounts, a chain of tiny legal levers that had been quietly put into place over months. Each one was a finger pointing at a single shadow. He confronted Kabir with the ledger open between them, the numbers a map of betrayal. Kabir looked like a man who had never been surprised. He sipped his coffee as if he were reading a bill of weather. "You are mistaken," Kabir said, voice calm enough to be poisonous. "There are complexities here. I can make this clearer if you let me." It was the first time Arav felt cold in his chest in a way that had nothing to do with old stone or winter. He realized then that what they had welcomed as investment was a planned eclipse. The fingers on their future had been greased and guided by a smile. Outside, rain loosened its grip on the city, and the factory's machines hummed as if nothing were different. In the kitchen at home, Mira hummed under her breath, unaware of the ledger burning a hole in her brother's hands. Ramesh, who had trusted that the future could be ordered with the serenity of good accounts, sat with his head bowed. Arav closed the ledger like a book on a childhood he no longer recognized. His promise to protect had been tested prematurely and had cracked in places. He had always believed in the rightness that work and honesty would bring. Now he understood a harder truth. The world rewarded attention, and attention could be bought or stolen. That night, as the city washed itself clean, Arav stood on the factory roof and watched. Neon lights stitched themselves into the river. He held a thin cigarette between his fingers, though he had never smoked before. Not because he needed it, but because the motion made his hands less like instruments and more like proof. He was still awake. Below, his house breathed in sleep. Above, the sky kept nothing of its promises. The seed of something else and the dark, slow things took root. It was not yet fury so much as a recognition that some things broken can be mended only when the one broken learns to strike with patience, not speed. He closed his fist around the cigarette, crushed it under the sole of his shoe, and felt for the first time in his life a plan hollowing itself into place. The next morning, the storm had passed, but inside Arhan, the thunder still raged. He returned to the small, broken apartment where he had been hiding for months. The walls were cracked, the windows covered with newspapers, and the silence echoed louder than any noise outside. On a wooden table lay a photograph, worn and faded. It showed Arhan with his parents and younger sister, Aisha. They were smiling, holding each other as if life was perfect. But that picture now burned his eyes like fire. It was Rayan Malik, a powerful businessman with a ruthless empire who had destroyed everything Arhan once had. Rayan's greed had stolen Arhan's father's business. His lies had sent his family into ruin, and his cruelty had led to the death of Aisha. Arhan clenched his fists. No more hiding. No more silence. I will rise again, and when I do, Rayan Malik will fall. But revenge could not be achieved with anger alone. He needed strength. He needed strategy. He needed to transform himself from the broken man he had become into a force that could not be defeated. That very day, Arhan made a vow. He would train his body until pain became his closest companion. He would sharpen his mind until no lie could deceive him. He would build alliances, quietly and carefully, so that when the time came, he would not stand alone. For the first time in months, Arhan's reflection in the cracked mirror did not look like a victim, it looked like a man reborn. His journey of transformation had begun. Days turned into weeks, and weeks began to blur into months. Arhan's life now had only one purpose: to rise from the ashes. At dawn, while the city still slept, he would run across the empty streets. His lungs burned, his legs trembled, but he never stopped. Pain is fuel, he repeated to himself, every single step pounding like a drumbeat of his rebirth. He joined a local gym, one hidden away in the old parts of the city where boxers and fighters trained in sweat and blood. At first, they laughed at him, a broken man with hollow eyes, trying to stand among warriors. But Arhan didn't flinch. Every punch he received, every insult thrown at him only carved his will sharper. Master Kabir, an ex-fighter who had once been a legend, noticed his persistence. Kabir was a man of discipline, with scars across his arms that told stories of countless battles. He approached Arhan one evening after training. "You're not here for fitness," Kabir said, his deep voice carrying both authority and curiosity. Arhan's eyes hardened. "I'm here for survival. And for justice." Kabir studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then you will need more than muscles. You will need focus, patience, and a mind sharper than any blade. If you're ready to suffer, I'll train you." From that day, Kabir became his mentor. Mornings were for endurance, afternoons for strength, and nights for combat skills. Arhan learned how to fight not with rage, but with control. He learned how to read his opponent's body, how to anticipate every strike, and how to use silence as a weapon. But it wasn't just physical training. Kabir pushed him to read books on psychology, strategy, even history of warriors who had toppled empires. Revenge without wisdom is suicide, Kabir often reminded him. One night, exhausted and bruised, Arhan sat with Kabir on the rooftop of the old gym. The city lights flickered like dying stars in the distance. Kabir asked, "Why do you fight so hard, Arhan? What do you seek at the end of this road?" Arhan's voice shook but carried fire. "I fight because I have nothing left to lose, and I seek the day when Rayan Malik looks into my eyes and realizes the man he destroyed is the one who will end him." Kabir placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then remember this, revenge is a blade with two edges. If you're not careful, it will cut you deeper than your enemy." Arhan nodded, but deep within, he already knew. He was ready to bleed if that was the price of justice. By the time another year passed, Arhan was no longer the broken man he once saw in the cracked mirror. His body was carved with strength, his mind sharp with knowledge, and his heart burning with purpose. the world had forgotten him. But soon the world would remember. When a man has lived long enough standing, in the hollow left by loss, his first move toward revenge is never loud. It is a small, precise thing, a seed pressed into the soil of an enemy's life and watered with patience. Arhan had learned to wait. He had learned to sharpen. Now he would learn how to cut without making a sound. Months of training had done more than toughen his body. They had rearranged the way he moved through the world. He had relearned the art of being invisible in plain sight. The patience of a chess player watching a careless opponent. The restraint of a man who knows that the loudest triumph is the one sees coming. Master Kabir's lessons echoed in his bones. Make the other man reveal his hand. Never show yours first. Arhan's first plan did not involve fists or guns. It involved small fractures, the quiet erosion of trust that makes a powerful man stumble. He began by studying Rayyan Malik's rhythms. Rayyan was not a monster in the crude sense. He was a predator attached to routine. He had partners, PR advisors, a sanctimonious public face, and habits. A charity gala every October, a lunch with the same banker every Tuesday, a fondness for leaving sensitive documents on his desk for days. Arhan cataloged these details like a scholar records stars. His first strike came on a Sunday morning, when the city was still puttering awake and Rayyan's office smelled of strong coffee and success. Arhan had spent nights learning to blend into the building's shadows, the janitor's path, the courier schedules, the cleaning crew's lunch breaks. He had practiced folding his breath to the rhythm of elevators and learned the timing of doors that clicked open like traps. A single envelope moved the first domino. Inside it was a forged invoice, painfully plausible. Stamped with a vendor's seal he'd bought from a low-level supplier who owed him a favor and a note. Addressed to a mid-level executive in Rayyan's finance team, the invoice claimed a routine payment. Its account number led to a shell company Arhan had set up months before, a lifeless ledger with the right humidity of legitimacy. The goal was not theft. The goal was a trace, a breadcrumb that would rattle a desk and attract suspicion. The breadcrumbs did their work. An alert, a question, then an internal audit. Rayyan's office bloomed with meetings about oversight and compliance. Arhan watched from the cafe across the street as Rayyan's face, usually smooth as polished stone, acquired the small creases of a man who had to spend his energy, explaining instead of commanding. It was not decisive, but it was a beginning, a pebble that created concentric ripples. Next, Arhan targeted reputation, the currency Rayyan hoarded like a miser. He planted a whisper among online communities, a photograph of a charity event with shadows, awkwardly blurred, and a caption suggesting Rayyan's donation had strings attached. He did not lie. He asked questions and let curiosity do the rest. When influential bloggers picked it up, Rayyan's PR team was forced into a defensive posture, issuing statements that read like prayers. Each public response was another small opening Arhan could pry at. But the man he had to wound was not a single column of pride. He was a network. To loosen one bolt, Arhan needed allies who understood how to turn rust into collapse. He began recruiting quietly, an accountant fired for refusing a manipulative entry, a courier who resented being dismissed, a former employee who had been squeezed out during one of Rayyan's earlier consolidations. Each of them had a story of a small injustice. Each of them, given a chance, would help him create noise where silence had once been perfect. Arhan's approach was never vengeful spectacle. He did not want to burn Rayyan's empire down in a bonfire for all to see. He wanted to make it unstable, to let the man feel the ground slide under his feet. To that end, he orchestrated a series of coincidences, delayed shipments timed with crucial investor meetings, a leaked memo that suggested internal dissent, an anonymous tip to a regulatory body about a minor accounting irregularity. Each act was surgical, designed to provoke a reaction and then retreat before the enemy had time to fire back. There was risk, always risk. Once, while slipping a falsified document into the pile of Rayyan's files at a downtown law firm, a security camera blinked alive at the wrong moment. Arhan froze, heart thudding like a trapped bird. He had rehearsed for the possibility of being seen. He had planned an alibi, a delivery to a nearby shop, a receipt he'd have in case the world asked for proof that he had been elsewhere. But better yet, he had planned patience. He waited, breathing in the dusty smell of paper and ink, and watched as the camera panned to a janitor sweeping by, a man he did not need to bribe, only to watch. Chance, he knew, sometimes favored the prepared. As the small shocks multiplied, Rayan began to change. The swagger thinned. The lunches became shorter, his speeches more cautious. Investors who once clapped warmly at his proposals began asking pointed questions. A board member who had never doubted him now called meetings that dragged into midnight. The kind of meetings where men with golden pens argued in tired voices about reputation and contingency plans. Rayan responded with denials and sharp emails, but the edges of his composure were nicked. Arhan watched these cracks like a man watching a painting slowly peel. But a single victory felt incomplete without the human price that had pushed him along this bleak path. He had not forgotten the faces of those he'd lost. In private moments, he returned to the small photograph on his table, letting the memory of his sister's smile re-steel his resolve. He made sure none of his allies crossed the line into cruelty. He wanted justice, not bloodlust. "We will make him accountable," he told them. "We will not become what we despise." One night, as rain drummed against the cafe window where he often sat, a shaken courier named Samir slid into Arhan's booth with news. Rayan's chief financial officer had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The ripple had reached the core. It was not the end. It was not the final blow, but it was the moment when whispers turned into action. Arhan allowed himself a rare, private smile. Not a smile of triumph, but a small, quiet acknowledgement that his plan, patient, precise and painfully slow, was working. He had made the first strike. He had shown Rayan that the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had thought, and yet even in that small success, Arhan felt the tightening knot of what could come. The bigger the man, the more brutal his backhand. He knew Rayan would retaliate, and that retaliation would not be clean. He also knew something else, taught by Master Kabir's gruff voice. After the first strike, the enemy learns your name. After that, your patience must be a wall. Arhan steeled himself. For every small fracture he planted, he expected a storm. The night ended with him walking home under the city's indifferent lights. He kept his head down, hands in pockets, footsteps measured. There was a compass in his chest now, calibrated to dignity and discipline. He had started the long work of answering harm with controlled force, of reclaiming a life by method rather than madness. Above him, in an office still lit behind glass, Rayan unrolled a map of his empire and examined the tiny burn marks that had begun to appear. He frowned. He tapped a finger on a photograph of himself smiling at a gala, as if he could press the image back into perfection. The plan had been simple: build, shield, expand. Now he felt something else: suspicion. And suspicion is a seed that grows feet and walks. Arhan watched that suspicion take root from a distance and, for the first time since the fall of his family, felt not only the weight of revenge, but the weight of responsibility. He had set change in motion. He would have to be ready for the consequence. When you strike at a giant, you do not kill him with the first wound, you wake him. And a giant awakened is far more dangerous than a giant asleep. Rayan Malik had begun to notice the cracks. The missing invoices, the whispers in the press, the restless murmurs in his boardroom. He was not a fool. His empire had been built on paranoia disguised as foresight. He sensed the hand of an enemy, though he did not yet know whose hand it was. Arhan, meanwhile, continued his silent war. He spent nights moving like smoke through the city, planting rumors, pulling tiny strings, turning allies of Rayan into hesitant partners. Every small victory tasted sweet, but deep inside, he knew it was only a matter of time before Rayan struck back. And then it came. One evening, as Arhan left the gym where Kabir trained him, he noticed the shadows following him. Two men, tall, broad, moving too carefully to be casual pedestrians. He turned corners, lengthened his stride, and the footsteps matched his rhythm. His instincts screamed. He ducked into a narrow alley, its walls sweating with dampness. And when the man entered, he was ready. The fight was brutal, raw, unpolished. Arhan's training came alive. He dodged the first punch, countered with a strike to the ribs, and twisted the second man's arm until bone cracked. But numbers and muscle weighed heavy. A blow to his jaw staggered him. Blood filled his mouth. And he realized this was not a random attack. This was Rayon's message. He barely escaped, slipping through back streets until he collapsed in the basement of his apartment. His ribs ached, his face was swollen, but his eyes burned brighter than before. "So," he muttered through split lips, "you felt me. Rayan, you know I exist. Good. Now the war begins." The next day, Kabir saw the bruises. His weathered face tightened with worry. "You're rushing," Kabir warned. "A cornered beast lashes out blindly. You've woken him too soon." Arhan shook his head. "No, this was inevitable. If he's looking for me, it means I've already unsettled him. That fear is my weapon now." But fear cut both ways. Rayan's retaliation grew sharper. His men tracked shipments Arhan had tampered with, threatened low-level workers suspected of betrayal, and spread their own rumors to smoke out the ghost haunting their empire. Within weeks, 3 of Arhan's quiet allies had disappeared. Samir, the courier who once brought him whispers, was found beaten and left on the roadside, barely alive. Arhan sat by Samir's hospital bed, fists trembling. Samir's words came out in gasps. He knows someone is out there. He thinks it's an old rival. But if he finds you, Arhan, he will burn the city to the ground." Arhan's heart twisted with guilt. His war was costing others. Every move forward put innocent people in danger. He returned to Kabir, torn between rage and doubt. "What if I've become the monster he is?" Arhan asked one night, staring at the cracked photograph of his family. "What if my revenge is destroying more lives than it saves?" Kabir's eyes softened. "Revenge is not the question anymore. The question is, do you want justice or do you want destruction? One saves your soul, the other consumes it." The words haunted him. For days, he trained harder than ever, not only with fists and strategies, but with silence. He meditated at dawn, forcing himself to picture not Rayon's defeat, but his family's peace. It became his anchor. The difference between turning into a vigilante beast or a disciplined avenger. Meanwhile, Rayon escalated further. He hired Imran Qureshi, a former intelligence officer with a reputation for tracking ghosts. Imran was methodical, relentless, and loyal to money, not morality. His job, find the invisible hand shaking Malik Enterprises. This changed everything. Arhan now had not just a corrupt businessman as his enemy, but a professional hunter on his trail. Every step had to be flawless. Every ally had to be shielded. One mistake, and years of patience would burn in a single flame. And yet the pressure did not break him. It hardened him. Watching Rayan scramble, watching the empire stagger under weight it had never carried, Arhan whispered into the dark. "You came for me too soon, Rayan. And now you'll bleed twice for every bruise you gave me." The counterattack had begun. Both men were now moving their pieces openly on the board, and the city itself was becoming their battlefield. Every empire has a cornerstone. For Rayan Malik, it was not his reputation, not even his political connections. It was his shipping. Empire, the network of cargo, routes that carried his wealth like veins, carrying blood through a body. From weapons hidden in containers to illegal trade disguised as legitimate goods, those ships were the bones of his kingdom. Arhan had spent months studying them. The schedules, the crew rotations, the ports where bribes flowed like water. He had mapped every detail on the walls of his basement apartment. A battlefield etched in paper, string, and pins. He knew that if he could wound the shipping lines, Rayan would bleed money, and money was the language Rayan trusted more than loyalty. But there was danger. Since Imran Qureshi had entered the game, shadows felt heavier. Arhan noticed strange vans parked too long at corners, phone lines clicking with interference, and footsteps that disappeared when he turned. Imran was circling him, and it was only a matter of time before predator and prey collided. Still, Arhan pushed forward. The plan. One of Rayan's largest shipments was due to leave the docks at midnight. On paper, it carried construction, equipment, but Arhan's sources whispered it was filled with smuggled weapons destined for a private militia. If exposed, it would not just cripple Rayan financially, it would put the law on his back like chains. Arhan's plan was risky. Infiltrate the dockyard, gather proof, and leak it to both the media and the authorities simultaneously. To do this, he reached out to an ally he had been saving for a critical moment, Nadia Khan. a fearless investigative journalist once silenced by Rayon's threats. She had lost her career exposing his corrupt ties years ago, but her fire had never gone out. "Why trust me now?" Nadia asked when Arhan met her in the shadows of a rundown cafe. "Because this time you won't stand alone," Arhan replied, his voice firm. "I'll give you everything you need to bury him. All I ask is that you tell the truth, loudly." Her eyes lit with the old fire. "Then let's make the city listen." The night of the heist. The dockyard slept under floodlights that hummed like insects. Guard towers loomed and men with rifles patrolled lazily, unaware of the storm approaching. Arhan moved like a phantom, slipping past fences, his steps timed with the sweep of searchlights. Inside one of the massive containers, he found what he was looking for. Rows of crates stamped with foreign seals, heavy with weapons wrapped in tarps. He photographed everything: serial numbers, shipping manifests, the faces of guards unloading cargo. Every click of the camera was another nail in Rayon's coffin. But danger arrived sooner than expected. Imran Qureshi was there. From the shadows, a calm voice echoed. "You've been clever." "Too clever." Arhan froze, heart pounding. Imran stepped forward, tall and sharp-eyed, his movements measured like a man who had studied predators his whole life. "You think you're hurting Malik, but all you've done is show me your scent. And now I'll follow you until you have nowhere left to hide." Arhan said nothing, slipping the camera into his jacket. The guards stirred, alerted by Imran's signal. Within seconds, the dockyard was alive with shouts and running boots. The chase was brutal. Arhan leaped over crates, ducked under chains, fists flying when cornered. He fought like a man possessed, every strike fueled by memories of Aisha's laughter, every dodge sharpened by Kabir's lessons. Bullets cracked the night, splintering wood inches from his head. Finally, with sheer will, he dived into the black water of the harbor, the cold biting his bones. The waves swallowed him as searchlights scanned the surface. By the time the guards fired, he was already gone, a shadow disappearing into deeper shadows. The fallout. By dawn, photographs of the weapons shipment were in Nadia's hands. Hours later, news outlets exploded with the story. Business mogul Rayan Malik, linked to illegal arms trade. Authorities launched an investigation, freezing assets, halting shipments, and summoning Rayan into questioning. The empire trembled. Investors panicked. Politicians distanced themselves. Rayan's face, once plastered on magazines as a symbol of success, now appeared under headlines of scandal. But Rayan Malik was not a man who surrendered. Watching the chaos unfold on television, he smashed a glass of whiskey against the wall and snarled, "Find him, Imran! I don't care what it costs. I want his name, his face, his grave." And Imran, nursing a bruise from their dockyard encounter, simply nodded. He had seen Arhan's eyes up close. They weren't the eyes of a desperate man. They were the eyes of someone ready to burn everything. That made the hunt personal. Arhan's reflection. Exhausted but unbroken, Arhan returned to Kabir's rooftop at dawn. His clothes dripped seawater. His body screamed with pain, but his spirit burned bright. For the first time, he had landed a decisive blow. Kabir looked at him silently, then said, "You've tasted victory. Now beware. This is when men like Malik become most dangerous. He will not fight fair. He will scorch the earth." Arhan stared at the rising sun, fists tightening. "Then let him. I was born in the fire he created. I will not burn. I will rise." The war was no longer hidden in shadows. It had erupted into the open. The days following, the dockyard incident turned into a storm Arhan had never seen before. Rayan Malik was wounded, but like a lion struck by an arrow, his fury only grew sharper. Every newspaper headline carried his disgrace. Every television channel replayed his humiliation, and whispers of his downfall spread through the city like wildfire. Yet in the same breath, his hunger for vengeance multiplied. Arhan stayed hidden in the shadows, moving from safe house to safe house, careful not to leave a trail. But he knew the silence before him was dangerous. Rayan would not sit quietly while his empire collapsed. And soon enough the blow came, not at him directly, but at the people who dared to stand by his side. It started with Nadia Khan. The journalist had become a beacon of truth overnight. Her report shook the city, her face broadcast everywhere. Praised for courage she had long buried under fear. But glory is a dangerous crown when your enemy is Rayan Malik. One night, while she drove home from a late news taping, her car was forced off the road by a black SUV. The crash left her, injured but alive, barely. The message was clear. No one who aided Arhan was untouchable. When Arhan heard, his chest tightened with guilt. He rushed to the hospital, slipping past reporters to see her broken form lying beneath tubes and monitors. Her voice, weak but steady, met him. "Don't stop what you started. Promise me," she whispered, her eyes burning with pain yet refusing to surrender. Arhan clasped her hand tightly. "I swear, Nadia, your voice won't fall silent again." But the attack struck something deeper inside him. For years, Arhan had fought quietly, methodically, guided by patience and Kabir's wisdom. Now, seeing Nadia's blood, he felt rage clawing at his chest. Revenge was no longer just about Rayan. It was about protecting those who believed in him. The battle had become personal in a way he had not expected. Meanwhile, Imran Qureshi's hunt tightened like a noose. He was not reckless like Rayan. He moved with patience, studying Arhan's patterns, his allies, the faint traces he left behind. Unlike the dockyard, where Arhan had slipped through his hands, this time Imran planned to corner him with precision. He began interrogating Rayan's old enemies, bribing street informants, even shadowing Kabir from a distance. Arhan could sense the net drawing closer, and yet he refused to stop. One evening, he met Kabir on the rooftop, the skyline burning orange with sunset. Kabir studied him silently before speaking. "You are walking a knife's edge. Arhan, the more you hurt Malik, the more he will strike at those near you. Revenge is fire. It burns both ways." Arhan's eyes were dark, but his voice was calm. "He already burned everything I loved. He thinks fear will chain me, but all it does is sharpen me. He will learn that when you leave a man with nothing, you leave him dangerous." Kabir sighed, knowing his student's path could no longer be turned. The next move came swiftly. Arhan discovered that Rayan had arranged a secret meeting with his investors in an attempt to rebuild their trust. If Arhan could sabotage this meeting, not only would Rayan lose his financial backing, but panic would spread like disease among his allies. For this, Arhan needed both strategy and courage, for the meeting was heavily guarded, and Rayan himself would be present. The night of the meeting arrived. In the heart of a glass tower, wealthy men gathered in tailored suits, speaking in hushed tones about losses and futures. Rayan entered with a smile stretched across his face, a mask hiding his fury. He assured them all was under control, that the dockyard scandal was nothing but lies. He poured wine, cracked jokes, and spun illusions of power still intact. But as the investors raised their glasses, the giant screen behind Rayan flickered to life. One by one, images filled the room, photographs of smuggled weapons, secret accounts, documents Arhan had gathered and sent through an anonymous system. The proof bled across the screen, undeniable, inescapable. Gasps echoed. Suits shifted nervously. Someone cursed under their breath. Rayan froze, his mask shattering in an instant. Fury lit his face as he smashed the remote against the table. "Who dares?" he began, but the damage was already done. Investors whispered, some hurriedly left, their faith crumbling in real time. And from the shadows of a nearby rooftop, Arhan watched through binoculars. His lips tightened into a grim smile. Every lie Rayan told was turning to dust before his own people. But triumph never came without a cost. As Arhan prepared to leave, a sharp sound split the air, a bullet striking the wall inches from his head. He ducked instinctively, his heart racing. Across the neighboring rooftop stood Imran Qureshi, sniper rifle in hand, eyes locked on him with predatory calm. Their gazes met in that electrifying moment, hunter and hunted. Arhan rolled away as another shot cracked the night, shattering concrete where he had stood. He fled into the darkness. But he knew one thing with certainty. Imran was no longer searching. He had found him. And now the real war had begun. The night after the failed sniper attack, Arhan knew his time in the shadows was thinning. Imran Qureshi had finally tracked him down. And when a predator as patient as Imran decided to strike, there was no place left for safety. Every corner felt like it carried eyes. Every silence was thick with threat. Still, Arhan refused to stop. The deeper he cut into Rayan's empire, the more desperate his enemy became. And desperation was the crack he intended to widen until the entire empire collapsed. But fate pushed him into confrontation sooner than he planned. It was in an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of the city, a place once filled with the rhythm of machines but now haunted by silence. Arhan had come there to meet a contact, a dock worker willing to testify against Rayan's smuggling network. Instead, he found the contact dead, his lifeless body sprawled across the cold concrete floor. The trap was clear, and when the heavy doors clanged shut behind him, Arhan knew who was waiting. Imran Qureshi stepped from the shadows, his figure calm, controlled, like a hunter savoring the moment before the kill. In his hand was no rifle this time, but a blade, gleaming faintly under the weak light. "You should have stayed hidden." Imran's voice cut through the emptiness, steady as stone. "Now you've made this personal. And personal things, they end badly." Arhan's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with the weight of years of loss. "I didn't start this." "Rayan did. You chose the wrong side, Imran." A faint smirk curved across Imran's lips. "There are no wrong sides, only winners and corpses." The air cracked as the first move came fast. Imran lunged with soldier's precision, the blade arcing toward Arhan's throat. Arhan twisted away, the metal grazing his shoulder, hot pain tearing through his skin. But he didn't falter. He countered with a strike of his own, a fist connecting with Imran's jaw, enough to stagger but not break him. The factory roared with echoes of combat. Grunts, blows, the clash of steel against makeshift weapons Arhan grabbed from the floor. Every strike from Imran was disciplined. Trained, a soldier who had survived wars. Every counter from Arhan was raw, burning, a man who had nothing left to lose. The contrast was terrifying and beautiful. Two worlds colliding in one storm of fury. Minutes stretched like hours. Arhan was thrown against walls, choking on dust, blood dripping from a cut above his brow. Imran's blade found his ribs, shallow but searing. Yet every time Imran thought he had broken him, Arhan rose again, his fists steady, his eyes burning brighter. "You fight like a man with ghosts," Imran hissed, pinning Arhan against a column, blade pressing dangerously close to his chest. "And you fight," Arhan spat back, gripping the blade with his bare hand, blood trickling between his fingers, "like a man with no soul." Summoning every ounce of strength, Arhan twisted, forcing the blade aside, and with a violent surge, slammed Imran onto the concrete floor. Dust erupted, and for the first time, the predator tasted defeat. But even on the ground, Imran's eyes held no fear, only a quiet, dangerous respect. "You're not like the others Malik crushed," Imran muttered, breathing heavy. "You're something else." Arhan stood over him, chest heaving, tempted to end it right there. His hand gripped a steel pipe, ready to bring it down, to finish the man who had hunted him like an animal. But something stopped him. The knowledge that killing Imran here would only feed Rayan's narrative, turn him from a ghost into a murderer. Instead, Arhan dropped the pipe beside Imran and stepped back. "Tell your master," he growled, voice trembling with fury, "that his time is running out, and when I come for him, I won't miss." Imran sat up slowly, wiping blood from his lip, his smirk returning despite the pain. "You'll regret this, Mercy. I promise you that." Without another word, Arhan disappeared into the darkness, leaving Imran alone on the cold floor. When he finally returned to Kabir's rooftop hideout, his body was broken, wounds burning, blood staining his clothes. Kabir rushed to his side, horror flashing in his old eyes. "You fought him," Kabir whispered, realizing what had happened. Arhan nodded weakly. "He's not just a soldier, Kabir. He's a shadow that breathes. But he bleeds. And if he bleeds, he can be beaten." Kabir placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Arhan. Shadows may bleed, but they also linger. And Imran will not stop until one of you is gone." Arhan looked out into the night sky, his vision blurred but his resolve sharper than ever. For the first time, he had seen the true face of Rayan's deadliest weapon. But he had also proven one truth. He could stand against him. And the war had only just begun. The city smelled of wet concrete and reckoning the morning the finale began. Arhan slept only a few hours, his body a map of bruises and fresh stitches, his mind a ledger of wrongs and the narrow, dangerous math he had chosen to balance them. He had learned a hard lesson over the past months. Vengeance could win battles but destroy the soul that waged them. Tonight, he wanted an ending that did not simply swap one ruin for another. He wanted justice that could be seen, held up, and not whispered about in back rooms. Word had leaked that Rayan Malik would host a private gala to mend bridges and coax back frightened investors. The venue was a glass cathedral of wealth. Tables gleamed, chandeliers scattered light like 100 small suns, and men in tailored suits smiled the polite smile of men trying to forget danger. It was the kind of place Rayan loved, public, polished, and spectacular, perfect for a final unmasking. Arhan moved through the night with measured steps and allies at his side. Nadia, still fragile from the attack but burning with renewed purpose, had agreed to lead the broadcast. Kabir watched from a safe distance, his face a carved map of concern and pride. Samir, scarred but alive, handled courier routes and logistics. Even Imran Qureshi had become an uneasy variable in the equation, present in different shadows. His loyalties complicated by the respect he had developed after their fight. Arhan could not rely on Imran. He could not predict him. But he understood that the truth, when poured on a man like oil, could slip into unexpected places and ignite. The first part of the plan unfolded without theatrics. Leaked documents, corroborated manifests, the dockyard photographs Nadia had printed in secret, and a trail of transfers connecting Malik. Enterprises to shell accounts and illegal shipments. Nadia prepared the segment as if she were stitching together a rope to pull the empire down. Clear facts, names, timestamps, indisputable records. Arhan's role was simpler and hardest at once. He would stand in the light long enough to show the city what his life had cost, but he would not become the executioner. When Nadia's voice went live and her footage filled the gala's giant screens, conversation turned to a different currency. Silence. The room that had once applauded Rayan's every joke sat frozen, each guest tracing the lines that tied their investments to smuggling and bribery. Cameras flashed, phones buzzed. In the front row, Rayan's smile was a mask slipping. He stood, voice steady at first, and tried to cast doubt. Legalities, fabrications, enemies who could not accept success. His words were practiced. His anger was a show. But the evidence slid across the table like winter light. Invoices, shipping manifests, intercepted messages, and the testimonial of men who had once carried his freight. Rayan's first instinct was to roar. It had been his way to intimidate, to buy silence, to crush the small until only the big remained. He rose from his chair, sweeping a hand as if to command the room back into his presence. "This is slander," he said, voice like broken glass. "These people are acting out of revenge." His eyes found Arhan through the dim, intending to reduce him to an enemy in need of eradication. Arhan walked forward into the open anyway. His hands were empty. He did not want to baptize the night with more blood. He wanted the law to take its course, to make the city and its institutions feel the shock of a truth they had been too polite to hear. He spoke with a voice that had been cut steady by months of silence and training. He did not fling accusations. He offered proof and testimony, each sentence a solid plank in the bridge from victim to vindication. He told not the story of vengeance, but the facts. Who had shipped what? Who had paid whom? Where money had moved? How men had disappeared for knowing too much. Rayan snapped like a struck animal. He denounced him, called him liar and thief and ghost. He moved to claim the microphone, to drown the testimony in his own thunder. That was when the second blade of the plan activated. Imran Qureshi, who had watched the truth unspool and who had watched Arhan fight the way a man can when pushed beyond human limits, rose from the back of the hall. He walked to the front with the slow, heavy weight of inevitability and stood beside Nadia. "You were asked to find the man who ruined my deals," Imran said. Not to the crowd, but to Rayan, voice cold with the professional tone of a man who once made enemies disappear. "What I found instead were ledgers, shipments, and names. I did my job. The proofs are here." He placed with a crisp motion a sealed folder on the table in front of the astonished mogul. In it lay intercepts Imran had gathered in his own investigation, phone records, unaccounted transfers, notes proving Rayan's direct order to silence men. For a rare, bewildered second, Rayan's empire of fear faltered because the hunter he had hired refused to remain a hired mouthpiece. The room tilted. Power, when not backed by complicity, is brittle. The legal machinery moved with slowness and speed at once. In the hours that followed, police acted on warrants Nadia's newsroom had helped trigger. Financial regulators froze critical accounts, and a public that had grown tired of quiet deception watched a man who had been untouchable become touchable. Rayan was led away, not in a scene of violent theatricality, but in the flat. Final way of law taking its place. He yelled as he was escorted through the doors, a sound like a dying storm. For a moment his eyes locked with Arhan's, and in that glance there was the old calculation and the new, small, clear defeat. Arhan felt the tide rush through him, relief and grief braided together. He had not broken Rayan by physical might. He had dismantled his network, exposed his crimes, and forced institutions to keep their oaths. Justice, messy and imperfect, had done the work he had once dreamed of doing with his own hands. After the arrests, there was a reckoning that reached beyond Rayan. Men who had taken bribes were called to account. Contracts were reviewed, and people who had once suppressed truth found it impossible to look away. Nadia's recovery became a story of its own, of a woman who would not be silenced. Samir, quietly, found small healing in seeing his attackers named and in the safe knowledge that his scars had not been for nothing. Kabir, watching from the rooftop, allowed himself a rare, private smile, as if an old edition of fate had finally been corrected. There was, of course, cost. Arhan had lost Aisha forever. No verdict could return the voice he missed. The city he walked now had new laws, new oversight, and for a time, new hope. But the memory of what had been taken lingered like a shadow. He visited the riverbank where he'd once stood in the cigarette smoke chill, now with Nadia and Samir beside him, and let the current carry away what it could. Words of forgiveness did not come easily, nor was there an easy wipe of pain. But there was a choice: to spend the rest of his life folding himself into a monument of hate, or to rebuild something that could keep loved ones safe. He chose to rebuild. In the months that followed, Arhan used the credibility he had, earned to start programs that supported families victimized by corporate crime, to help fund legal clinics that taught the poor how to demand their rights, and to mentor young men who had once wandered into violence. He did not seek the bright glare of publicity. He worked in the steady, slow way his father had taught him on his better days, by counting threads and measuring seams, by small acts that meant a future might be steadier for someone else. Imran left Malik's shadow for good. His conscience, honed by a career in silence, found a different use. He joined a task force dedicated to rooting out corporate crime, using his skill for tracking to undo what he once enabled. Nadia rebuilt her career with a book and a platform that mentored new, investigative journalists. Samir, quieter, preferred the slow rhythm of a courier's life, but now he walked with less fear. On a clear morning, years after the first small betrayals began, Arhan stood at the edge of the river and watched sunlight fracture along the water. He carried no trophies, no severed heads of enemies. He had scars and losses, and the knowledge that some nights would always be long. But he also carried a ledger of people helped, of institutions nudged into honesty, of a sister remembered with honest ache rather than festering hate. He had not become the monster he once feared he might. He had not survived to become an echo of the man who destroyed him. He had learned to turn his brokenness into a map for others, a painful, deliberate cartography of what not to become. The world had given him ruin. He had chosen to give back repair. As the sun rose, Arhan whispered a promise he had kept to himself like a prayer. We rebuild. We remember. We rise. Then he folded his hands against the cool air, and with each breath, let the city relearn how to be brave.